This is not just another conflict. This is a war that has lasted for millennia, a war that has shaped civilizations, rewritten history, and divided nations. The Bible prophesied this battle long before modern nations even existed. To politicians, this is just a territorial war over land and power. To historians, it's the result of centuries of unresolved conflicts. But to believers, this is spiritual warfare, a conflict with divine consequences that has been unfolding since the dawn of time. And today it is escalating more than ever before. The world is watching, some in confusion, others in fear. Why has this war lasted so long? Is there an end in sight? Or is this part of a much greater prophecy, one that is still unfolding? From the covenant God made with Abraham to the prophecies of Revelation, this war has been written about for thousands of years. And today we are about to uncover the hidden truths that most people never see. Get ready, because this is the Israel-Palestine war explained like never before. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Bible Galaxy for more revelations on how ancient prophecy connects to modern-day events. To understand the present, we must first go back thousands of years to a time when one man's destiny shaped the fate of nations. His name, Abraham, Genesis 12, 1-3. God chose Abraham and promised his descendants a land of inheritance. But who would receive this promise? This is where the divide begins. Abraham had two sons, Ishmael, born to Hagar, an Egyptian slave, Isaac, born to Sarah, Abraham's wife in her old age. The Bible makes it clear God's covenant would pass through Isaac, making him the father of Jacob, whose descendants became the Israelites. Genesis 17, 19-21. The land was promised to Isaac and his descendants. But wait, God also blessed Ishmael, promising that he would become a great nation. Genesis 16, 10-12. Ishmael's descendants, traditionally understood to be the Arab peoples, including the Palestinians, also saw this land as their inheritance. But this wasn't just a family dispute. It was a divine prophecy unfolding, and this prophecy set the stage for a clash that would last thousands of years. At the very heart of the Israel-Palestine conflict lies one question: who does this land rightfully belong to? This is not just about political control. This land represents identity, history, faith, and prophecy for both sides. For the Jewish people, Israel is not just a place to live, it is the fulfillment of an ancient promise. Genesis 15, 18-21. To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was not a temporary agreement. It was a promise of eternal inheritance. God reaffirmed this covenant multiple times, through Moses, through King David, and through the prophets. The Bible foretold that Israel would be scattered due to their disobedience, but it also prophesied their return. Ezekiel 37:21. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone, and I will bring them back into their own land. Many believers today see the rebirth of modern Israel in 1948 as the fulfillment of this prophecy. But on the other side of history, the Palestinians have their own claim to the land. For centuries, Palestinians have lived in this land, farming its soil, raising their families, and building their communities. Many trace their lineage to Ishmael, the son of Abraham. Others claim to be descendants of the Canaanites, who lived in this land before the Israelites arrived. To the Palestinians, this land is more than just territory, it is home. But here's the problem: both sides believe they have a divine right to this land. Both have historical ties spanning thousands of years, and both refuse to give up what they see as their inheritance. This is what makes the Israel-Palestine conflict so complex. It is not just a modern political issue, it is a spiritual war stretching back to the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael. And as we will see, this ancient battle is far from over. 1948, a pivotal year that changed the course of history forever. For the Jewish people, it was a miracle, the restoration of their ancient homeland after nearly 2,000 years of exile. For the Palestinians, it was the Nakba, the catastrophe, a moment of mass displacement, suffering, and loss. But how did this moment come to be? To understand why 1948 was so divisive, we must go back several decades before it happened. The rise of Zionism and Jewish immigration. In the late 19th century, a movement called Zionism emerged. What was Zionism? It was the belief that the Jewish people should return to their biblical homeland and establish a Jewish state. For centuries, Jews had faced persecution, exile, and massacres across Europe and the Middle East. From the Spanish Inquisition to the Russian pogroms, Jewish communities had suffered oppression and genocide. By the early 1900s, thousands of Jewish families began migrating to Palestine, believing they were returning to the land God had promised them. But there was a major problem. Palestine, at that time, was not an empty land. It was already home to a predominantly Arab population. These communities had lived there for centuries, passing land through generations. To them, this was their ancestral home. This created immediate tension between Jews and Arabs. November 2nd, 1917. A single letter changed everything. The British government issued the Balfour Declaration, stating, "His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people." For Zionists, this was a huge win. For Palestinians, this was a betrayal. Why? Because the British had also promised Arab independence in exchange for their help during World War I. Yet instead of honoring that promise, Britain supported the Zionist goal of a Jewish homeland. This was seen as an act of colonialism, where foreign powers were deciding the fate of Palestine. Tensions exploded. Jewish immigration skyrocketed. Land disputes increased. Arabs felt their homeland was being taken away. By the 1930s, riots and violent clashes broke out across Palestine. And then, World War II changed everything. 1939 to 1945. The Holocaust and Jewish refugees. The Nazis unleashed a nightmare upon the world. 6 million Jews murdered. Men, women, and children were sent to concentration camps, where they were gassed, starved, and executed. Entire Jewish families were wiped out in an instant. And when the war was over, the world saw the horrors of the Holocaust. The question became unavoidable. Where would the Jewish survivors go? Many sought to immigrate to Palestine, hoping to rebuild their lives. But Britain blocked them. Britain, fearing Arab backlash, restricted Jewish immigration. Jewish refugees were trapped in camps, still suffering even after the war. Zionist militias, furious at British policies, began attacking British soldiers. Britain, overwhelmed by the growing violence, gave up control of Palestine. And in 1947, they handed the issue over to the United Nations. November 29th, 1947. The United Nations voted on a solution. The plan? Divide Palestine into two separate states. A Jewish state, Israel, 55% of the land. An Arab state, Palestine, 45% of the land. Jerusalem would remain under international control. For Zionists, this was a dream come true. They finally had international recognition for a Jewish state. But the Arabs saw this as a disaster. Why should 30% of the population, Jews, receive 55% of the land? Many Arab villages would be under Jewish rule. Jerusalem, a holy city, was now under foreign control. The Arab world rejected the plan. And then, war broke out. 1948. The birth of Israel and the Nakba. May 14th, 1948. History was made. Israel declared independence. Jewish people celebrated, dancing in the streets. They saw this as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. But within 24 hours, war broke out. 5 Arab nations invaded Israel. Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon sent in their armies. They vowed to destroy the newly formed Jewish state. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War began. The war that changed everything for Israel. This was a war for survival. Outnumbered and outgunned, they fought fiercely. Jewish militias became the Israeli Defense Forces, UNDF. With limited resources, they defended their land. For Palestinians, this was a catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced. Many fled, believing they would return after an Arab victory. Others were forcibly removed by Israeli forces. Entire Palestinian villages were depopulated and destroyed. Thousands became refugees, forced into exile. The war ended in 1949 with a decisive Israeli victory. Israel now controlled 78% of historic Palestine. The West Bank was controlled by Jordan. Gaza was controlled by Egypt. But no Palestinian state was created. The displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians created a refugee crisis that continues to this day. And this war planted the seeds for all future conflicts. The battle lines were drawn, the wounds never healed, and as we will see, the war had only just begun. The tensions between Israel and its Arab neighbors never disappeared after 1948. Instead, they grew stronger, fueled by a deep sense of unfinished business, national pride, and the fight for survival. By 1967, war was inevitable. In the years after Israel's victory in 1948, hostility between Israel and the Arab states intensified. Arab nations refused to recognize Israel's existence. Palestinian refugees were still stateless and demanded their right to return. Border clashes increased, with frequent attacks from Palestinian militants. But what finally ignited the war? In May 1967, the tensions reached a boiling point. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser ordered UN peacekeepers to leave the Sinai Peninsula. He then massed Egyptian troops along Israel's southern border, signaling that war was coming. Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran, cutting off Israel's access to a vital waterway. This was an act of war. Israel depended on this route for trade, and its closure put the nation in serious economic danger. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq signed military agreements, preparing for a joint attack on Israel. Arab radio stations broadcast threats of destruction, vowing to wipe Israel off the map. With enemies surrounding them on all sides, Israel feared a second Holocaust. Their leaders knew that if they waited for an attack, Israel might not survive. So in a bold and desperate decision, Israel launched a preemptive strike. At 7:45 a.m., Israeli warplanes took off in what would become one of the most brilliant military operations in modern history. Within hours, Israel destroyed nearly the entire Egyptian Air Force while it was still on the ground. Syria and Jordan were also caught off guard. By the end of the first day, Israel had total air superiority. In just 6 days, Israel made history. Day 2 to 3, Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula in Gaza from Egypt. Day 4, Israel took the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan. Day 5 to 6, Israel seized the Golan Heights from Syria. In less than a week, Israel tripled its territory. For Israel, this was an overwhelming, miraculous victory. For the Arab world, it was a humiliating defeat. And the consequences of this war are still being felt today. With its newly conquered lands, Israel now controlled millions of Palestinians. This began the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. What does occupation mean? It means that Israel now ruled over Palestinian lands without granting Palestinians full rights. Palestinians could not travel freely. Military checkpoints controlled movement. Land was confiscated and Jewish settlements were built. This occupation was seen as an attack on Palestinian sovereignty. Palestinians responded with uprisings, protests, and armed resistance. The rise of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO. The PLO was founded in 1964 with one main goal: liberate Palestine. Led by Yasser Arafat, the PLO became the face of Palestinian nationalism. They launched guerrilla attacks and international terrorism, including hijackings and bombings. Israel responded with military crackdowns and airstrikes. The world was now watching. For Israel, the PLO was a terrorist organization. For Palestinians, the PLO was their only hope for freedom. The conflict had reached a new level of intensity. On October 6, 1973, the Arabs launched a surprise attack. On Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism, Egypt and Syria launched a massive invasion. Egyptian forces stormed across the Suez Canal into the Sinai. Syrian tanks attacked the Golan Heights. Israel was caught completely off guard. For the first time, Israel was losing. But after 2 weeks of brutal fighting, Israel turned the tide. They pushed the Egyptians back across the Suez. They advanced deep into Syria. A ceasefire was signed, but the war changed everything. In retaliation for Western support of Israel, Arab nations cut off oil supplies, triggering an energy crisis worldwide. The Middle East was now the center of global politics. After 1967, Israel started building settlements in the West Bank and Gaza. For Israel, this was their biblical homeland. For Palestinians, this was an illegal occupation. Tensions boiled over. 1987, the First Intifada uprising erupts. Mass protests, stone throwing at Israeli soldiers, violent crackdowns. Palestinian anger reached a breaking point. Then, in 1993, peace seemed possible. The Oslo Accords were signed. Israel and the PLO recognized each other. Palestinians were promised self-rule in Gaza and the West Bank. A roadmap to peace was laid out. The world celebrated. But it didn't last. Suicide bombings, Israeli tanks rolling into Palestinian cities. The bloodshed reached unprecedented levels. Israel built a massive security wall, further dividing Palestinians and Israelis. The hope for peace was shattered once again. The conflict was no longer just about land. It had become a never-ending cycle of violence. And as we will see, the fight for Jerusalem would make things even worse. The year 2000. The peace process crumbles and violence erupts once again. After years of negotiations under the Oslo Accords, many Palestinians felt betrayed. Yet as Israeli settlements in the West Bank continued expanding, checkpoints, military control, and restrictions on movement remained. Many Palestinians believed Israel had no real intention of allowing them full statehood. Then came the final spark. Ariel Sharon, an Israeli political leader, visited the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The Temple Mount is the holiest site in Judaism. It is also home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam. For Israelis, this was part of their right to visit their religious site. For Palestinians, this was a direct provocation, a message that Israel wanted full control over Jerusalem. Within hours, massive protests erupted across the West Bank and Gaza. Within days, it escalated into a full-scale Palestinian uprising. The Second Intifada had begun. Unlike the First Intifada, which was mostly stone-throwing protests, this uprising was far deadlier. Palestinian militant groups, including Hamas, began launching suicide bombings across Israel. Israeli cities became war zones, with buses, restaurants, and markets targeted. Over 1,000 Israelis were killed. Israel responded with full military force. Tanks rolled into Palestinian cities. Israeli forces assassinated militant leaders. Entire neighborhoods were raided, and thousands of Palestinians were arrested. Over 3,000 Palestinians were killed. The world watched in horror as peace talks collapsed, replaced by relentless bloodshed. After years of attacks, Israel took drastic measures. They built a massive 440-mile-long wall between Israel and the West Bank. Israel called it a security barrier to stop terrorism. Palestinians called it an illegal land grab that cut through their homes, farms, and businesses. To some, the wall brought security. To others, it became a symbol of apartheid. But one thing was certain: this wall made peace even harder to achieve. The dream of a two-state solution seemed more impossible than ever. For years, the Palestinian Authority, PA, had been the main political body representing Palestinians. But in 2006, Palestinian elections took place. Hamas, a militant Islamist group, won. This victory changed everything. Hamas refused to recognize Israel. Hamas was committed to armed resistance. This led to a split in Palestinian leadership. The Palestinian Authority controlled the West Bank. Hamas took over Gaza. The division between Palestinians weakened their cause, and Israel took full advantage. With Hamas in power, Gaza became a battleground. Hamas began launching rockets into Israeli cities. Israel responded with airstrikes and military operations. The cycle of war began. 2008, Israel launched Operation Cast Lead. 2012, another war in Gaza. 2014, one of the deadliest conflicts, lasting 50 days. Thousands of Palestinians and Israelis died. Every few years, war breaks out again. Israel bombs Gaza. Hamas fires rockets into Israel. Civilians on both sides suffer. And yet nothing changes. There is still no peace. Jerusalem remains the undisputed heart of this conflict. Both Israelis and Palestinians claim it as their capital. The Temple Mount remains the most contested religious site in the world. Every attempt to settle the dispute has failed. And every time violence breaks out, the world watches. Biblical prophecies foretold this. Zechariah 12:2-3. I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling for all nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. Is this happening right now? Jerusalem is at the center of global tension. Nations are divided over Israel's claim to the city. Religious and political conflicts keep escalating. Revelation the 16:16. Then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Could Jerusalem be the spark that ignites the final battle? Many believe that this war is not just political, it is prophetic. Are we approaching the end times? Is this war just about land, or is it part of a much greater spiritual battle? Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. Some believe this war is a strategy of Satan to destroy God's people and stop prophecy. Others see this as a sign that we are approaching the end times. But here's the question. Where does this all lead? We are witnessing the stage being set for the final chapters of biblical prophecy. The ongoing strife over Israel and Palestine is not just political turmoil, it is a divine script unfolding in real time. Nations are aligning, deception is increasing, and spiritual warfare is intensifying. The question is no longer if prophecy is being fulfilled, it's how soon we will see its climax. This chapter uncovers the modern geopolitical tensions, their spiritual significance, and what biblical prophecy foretells about the days ahead. The world has fought over many lands, but no city in history has carried more spiritual weight than Jerusalem. Revelation 11:8 describes Jerusalem as the great city where their Lord was crucified, a city at the heart of the final battles. Zechariah 14:2 prophesies, all nations will gather against Jerusalem in the last days. Why is the world so obsessed with this city? Because Jerusalem is not just a place, it is a prophetic symbol. It represents God's dwelling place on earth, the city of the coming King, where Christ will reign, the ultimate battleground between heaven and hell. Every political decision, every war, and every peace deal centered on Jerusalem is a fulfillment of prophecy. And today, the tensions surrounding this ancient city are reaching a boiling point unlike anything before. At the heart of this conflict is the Temple Mount, the most contested religious site on earth. For the Jewish people, it is the location of their ancient temple, the very site where God's presence once dwelled. For Muslims, it houses the Al-Aqsa Mosque, making it the third holiest site in Islam. For Christians, it is where Jesus taught, overturned tables, and will one day return. But prophecy is clear. This location will become the epicenter of a coming conflict. 2 Thessalonians 2:4 warns that the Antichrist will enter the temple and declare himself as God. Revelation 11:1-2 describes a coming period where the Temple Mount is divided between worshipers and outsiders. Today, tensions over this site erupt regularly, and each clash foreshadows the coming prophetic showdown. The world sees political disputes over the Temple Mount. Believers see a spiritual battleground preparing for the final days. The Bible prophesies a final global war centered on Israel. Ezekiel 38-39 describes an invasion from the north, where a coalition of nations attacks Israel. Daniel 11:40 speaks of conflicts involving the king of the north and the king of the south. And right now, these prophetic alliances are forming before our eyes. Russia and Iran, long-standing enemies of Israel, growing closer through military and economic alliances. Turkey, once friendly with Israel, now shifting toward a more aggressive stance. China, increasing involvement in Middle Eastern politics, seeking to weaken Western influence. The United Nations, passing resolution after resolution condemning Israel, echoing the prophecy that all nations will turn against Jerusalem. On the other side, we have the nations supporting Israel. The United States, Israel's strongest ally, providing military and financial support. European nations. Some remain divided, but many continue backing Israel diplomatically. This division is not random. It is setting the stage for the final conflict prophesied in the Bible. As conflict escalates, the Bible warns that deception will flood the earth. Jesus warned in Matthew 24:4-5, "See that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am the Messiah,' and will deceive many." 2 Thessalonians 2:9-10 describes the Antichrist's rise as being accompanied by all sorts of counterfeit signs, wonders, and deception. And what do we see today? A rise in false messiahs, world leaders claiming to bring peace while fueling division. An explosion of propaganda, news outlets twisting narratives, shaping public perception against Israel. Increased anti-Semitism, the world growing colder toward the Jewish people, just as prophecy foretold. The great deception has begun, and only those who remain grounded in biblical truth will recognize what's happening. One of the most alarming prophetic signs is the rise of global surveillance, economic control, and digital tracking. Revelation 13:16-17 prophesies, "No one will be able to buy or sell unless they have the mark of the beast." For centuries, people wondered how such control could be possible. Today, we have the answer. Digital ID systems are rolling out worldwide. Cashless economies are expanding, making financial control easier. Artificial intelligence, AI, and surveillance allow governments to track citizens in ways never before possible. The infrastructure for global economic control is being built right now. The question is not if this system will emerge, it is when it will be fully enforced. Based on biblical prophecy, here is what we can expect in the days ahead. Increasing global turmoil, wars, rumors of wars, and nations rising against each other. More pressure on Jerusalem. The world will continue fighting over the holy city, the rebuilding of the Third Temple. Jews are actively preparing for temple reconstruction, fulfilling prophecy. A rise in persecution. Believers will face growing hostility for standing with truth. A false peace agreement, a temporary solution, will be proposed, but it will be part of the Antichrist's deception. We are standing on the edge of the prophetic timeline. The world is watching Israel through political eyes. Believers must see Israel through prophetic eyes. The battle for Jerusalem is not just an earthly one. It is a war in the heavenlies. And soon the final battle will be fought, not by nations, but by the King of Kings himself. We are standing at the threshold of history's final and most defining moments. The world is shifting, alliances are forming, and conflicts are escalating. But this is no ordinary war. It is a divine countdown leading to the battle that will end all battles. Armageddon. Prophecy warns that Jerusalem will be the epicenter of the last global war. A war not merely fought with weapons, but one rooted in an ancient spiritual conflict that began before time itself. The world may think it is in control, but prophecy tells us the truth. The coming global wars is a prophetic prelude to Armageddon. The Bible foretells a series of escalating wars leading up to the final battle. The War of Psalm 83, the War of Ezekiel 38-39, Gog and Magog, the Final War, Armageddon, Revelation 16:16, Zechariah 14:2-4. Each of these wars plays a crucial role in the unfolding of prophecy. Psalm 83:4 describes a coalition of nations saying, "Come, let us wipe them out as a nation, so that the name of Israel is remembered no more." This war is believed to involve Israel's immediate enemies, surrounding Arab nations that have long sought its destruction. Hamas and Hezbollah, terror groups launching attacks against Israel. Iran-backed militias, actively seeking Israel's downfall. Terror factions across the Middle East, aligning for future assaults. This conflict will likely ignite larger-scale wars, drawing global superpowers into direct confrontation. Ezekiel 38:15-16 foretells, "You will come from your place in the far north, a vast army like a cloud covering the land. I will bring you against my land so that the nations may know me." This describes a massive invasion of Israel by a northern coalition, one that we see forming right now. Who are these nations? Magog equals Russia, Persia equals Iran, Togarmah equals Turkey, Put equals Libya, Cush equals Sudan. What will happen? This invasion will be sudden and overwhelming. Israel will be outnumbered, but God himself will step in. The enemy forces will be supernaturally destroyed, leaving no doubt that the God of Israel is real. Ezekiel 39:6 declares, "I will send fire on Magog and those who live in security on the coastlands, and they will know that I am the Lord." This war will shake the world. It will trigger a massive shift in global power, paving the way for the rise of the Antichrist. 2 Thessalonians 2:9-10 warns, "The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with Satan's work, displaying all kinds of power, signs, and lying wonders." Who is the Antichrist? A world leader who will promise peace but bring destruction. A master of deception, using miracles and political influence to gain control. A figure who will establish a global system, economically, militarily, and spiritually. Daniel 9:27 prophesies, "He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years. But in the middle of the week, he will break it and desecrate the temple." This means he will broker a Middle East peace deal, but it will be a deception. He will allow the rebuilding of the third temple, but then defile it. He will demand to be worshipped as God, but will face divine judgment. What will happen next? This deception will lead to the final and most cataclysmic war in human history. Armageddon. Revelation 16:16 prophesies, "They gathered the kings together at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon." This is the final war of history, where all the nations will march against Israel and Jerusalem. The Antichrist forces will attempt to destroy God's people. The armies of the world will unite under his rule. Jerusalem will be surrounded, and it will seem like all hope is lost. Zechariah 14:2-4 warns, "I will gather all nations to Jerusalem for battle. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations. On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. And then, at the darkest moment in human history, the sky will break open. The return of Jesus Christ, the King, comes to reign." Revelation 19:11-16 declares, "Then I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns." Jesus will return, not as a humble servant, but as a conquering king. He will speak, and the armies of the world will be destroyed. He will bind Satan and cast him into the abyss. He will establish his throne in Jerusalem and rule for 1,000 years. Revelation 26 proclaims, "Blessed are those who take part in the first resurrection. They will reign with him for 1,000 years." This is the final victory. This is the fulfillment of prophecy, and this is the destiny of those who belong to Jesus. The urgency of the hour, how should we respond? As prophecy unfolds, we cannot remain silent or complacent. Watch, stay alert, because deception is increasing. Matthew 24:42. Pray, intercede for Israel and for the lost. Psalm 122 verse 6. Prepare, strengthen your faith because trials are coming. Ephesians 6:11-13. Share the gospel. Time is running out. Matthew 28:19-20. The world is heading toward the final war, but for believers, our victory is already secured. Behold, I am coming soon. Jesus, Revelation 22:12. The Israel-Palestine conflict is more than a political struggle. It is a battle of history, prophecy, and spiritual warfare. The world is watching. What do you think? Is this just a territorial war, or is it part of a biblical prophecy unfolding? Comment below, like and share this video. Subscribe for more biblical revelations. May God's truth be revealed, and may peace come to all nations.